The stagecoach arrived under the veil of sunrise, creaking like it carried ghosts instead of passengers. Dust rose in its wake and hung in the still morning like breath held too long. She stepped down, boots worn, skirts practical, the scent of iron on her skin and memory in her eyes. No one offered a hand, and she didn't expect one. Before her stretched the ranch. Low barns crouched like old dogs, fencing strung like tired bones, and the prairie behind it vast and silent, gold-touched by the new sun. The ranch house was modest, flanked by a weather-beaten windmill spinning slowly, the only motion in a world that seemed to hold its breath. She walked. A canvas satchel bounced against her hip. Inside was a crumpled letter offering work, a cook needed at Three Lanterns Ranch. The ink had run in one corner, a splash of coffee or something darker. No name was signed, just a town address, a wage offer, and a start date. Today. Chickens scattered as she passed the bunkhouse, their feathers whispering against the wind. A dog barked once, then stopped like it remembered its manners. Smoke coiled from the chimney of the kitchen, faint and inviting. She followed it. No one met her. Inside, the kitchen was warm with yesterday's heat. Cast iron pans hung above the stove, blackened with time. A row of tin plates waited beside a bucket of murky dishwater. She set down her satchel and rolled up her sleeves. By the time the first cowboy walked in, she was elbow-deep in flour. He nodded, silent. Saturday. Another followed. And another. They filled the space like weather rolling in, quiet, heavy, watching. She didn't ask their names. They didn't ask hers. The foreman arrived last. Broad shoulders, white hair in a braid, and a glass eye that gleamed like frost. He looked at her like a question. She looked back like an answer. "You the cook," he said. "I am today." That earned a flicker of something near amusement. "Don't need your history. Feed us right, we don't ask questions." "I prefer it that way." He pulled a chair, sat like the wood might break under his weight. "Coffee strong, eggs hot, bread fresh. That's all that matters. You get that wrong, things go bad quick." She nodded, and he didn't speak again. She served them in silence. Their hands were rough, their clothes sun-faded and patched. They ate like men who worked hard and trusted little. She noticed how one of them never sat, only leaned in the corner with his hat low and eyes shaded. He never took more than half a plate, never spoke. Something in the way he stood made her think of coiled rope. Or regret. When breakfast was done, the room emptied in silence. No thank yous. Just boots, scraping chairs, and the slam of the door against the wind. She cleaned. Outside, the prairie stretched in every direction. No church steeple, no general store, just the slow, swaying sea of dry grass and the occasional caw of a hawk overhead. The land was wide enough to drown a secret and quiet enough to forget it ever whispered. She began to learn the rhythms of the place. The bunkhouse bell at 5. Hooves at 6. Bacon grease and biscuits by 7. The kitchen grew warmer with familiarity, but never entirely safe. Eyes still followed her like shadows. One of the boys, a boy truly, had a laugh like a cracked bell. He whittled animals from scraps of cedar, left them on her windowsill. Another, older, limped and spoke Spanish in his sleep. She noticed things. The foreman's ledger always locked. A rifle behind the back pantry door. Fences that bent around land not theirs, as if avoiding something invisible. But it was the quiet man who stood out most. He mended the fence lines alone, even when others rode out. Never raised his voice, never sat at the table unless the others had finished. She caught him once, just before dawn, standing by the barn with his hand on the wood like he could feel something inside it breathing. She asked no questions. He offered no name. Still, his eyes found her sometimes. Not in hunger or judgment, just something like memory, like he recognized a part of her she tried to forget. One evening, she stood outside the kitchen door, wiping flour from her hands. The sun was bleeding into the horizon, sky the color of a split lip. Wind rolled and slow. It smelled like dry thunder and far-off pine. The quiet man was there again, by the fence line, staring toward the hills. His silhouette cut against the fading light, still solitary. She called out. Not loud. Just enough to carry. That part of the fence broken again. He didn't turn. Didn't speak. But he did nod once, slow. You always fix things that ain't yours. This time, he turned halfway. The shadow of his hat hid most of his face. Sometimes you fix what you remember, not what you own. The words stuck in the air like burrs. She watched him until he walked off, disappearing into the tall grass, his figure swallowed by twilight. She didn't follow. That night, as she folded sheets in the spare room they'd given her, she found an old newspaper used to stuff the mattress corners. Dated 7 years back. A headline faded, but legible. Land title disputed after war. New ownership under question. Her heart beat once, hard. Then again. She didn't know who owned the land she cooked on. But someone did. And someone else wanted it back. The wind picked up outside, and something in it sounded like a name. Not hers. Not his. But a name buried deep in soil that still hadn't settled. She folded the sheet, placed it on the cot, and sat down with her back to the wall. There was something wrong on this land, and she was already part of it. The days grew longer, not by the clock, but by the way the sun hung in the sky like it was waiting for something to happen. The cook had learned the rhythm of the ranch by then, how the land breathed, how the men moved, how silence filled the spaces where trust hadn't yet taken root. She worked early and late, her hands calloused from hot skillets and cold wash basins. The kitchen had become her domain, a place where the fire obeyed and the knives gleamed. Still, outside its walls, the ranch shifted, like a dog that might bite if you touched the wrong scar. The quiet man kept to himself, but his presence threaded through each day like a warning. He walked the perimeter with a rope slung over one shoulder and a rifle across his back, not looking for trouble, but expecting it. She saw the way the other men deferred to him, not out of fear, but respect that had been earned somewhere none of them spoke of. He never gave a name. No one asked. One morning, as she hung cloves to dry on a crooked line behind the kitchen, a boy emerged from the stables, barefoot, dark-eyed, maybe 12. He carried a pail half his size, sloshing water on the path. His face was still, unreadable. He didn't speak, but when she nodded, he nodded back. Later, she asked the foreman about him. Stable hand. Comanche, partly. Took him in last fall. Doesn't talk much. What's his name? Don't matter. He ain't staying long. She didn't press further, but the way the boy moved, cautious, always watching, told her more than words could. She began leaving an extra biscuit on the porch rail before sunrise. It disappeared every time. The land around the ranch wasn't settled. Not really. Fences were more suggestions than boundaries. The next property overbelonged to a man named Danton, a former colonel with money and temper both inherited. He hadn't been seen in town in months, but his men rode the edge of the range like wolves patrolling a forgotten claim. One afternoon, a rider from Danton's side stopped at the gate. Young, dust-covered, nervous. He handed the foreman an envelope and rode off without waiting for an answer. The letter smelled of pipe smoke and arrogance. The foreman read it at the kitchen table while the cook poured coffee. When he finished, he folded the paper once, precisely, and set it beside his cup. Danton says we're 50 acres into his claim. Are we? She asked. Hard to say. He scratched his jaw. Depends which war map you use. She waited, but he said no more. Just drank his coffee and stared through the wall like it might blink first. That night, the quiet man didn't eat. She saw him ride out before dusk, rifle slung low. He returned after midnight, the smell of creek water and pine on him. The boy was waiting at the stable when he returned. They spoke, not in words but gestures. Then the quiet man handed him something wrapped in cloth, small, flat, old. The boy tucked it into his shirt and vanished. The next morning, the cook found a cedar carving on her windowsill. Not a horse this time. A feather. She noticed things more now. The barn had old scorch marks beneath new paint. The pantry door's frame had been recently repaired, poorly, like someone had kicked it open. She found a map behind a stack of flour sacks, rolled tight and stained with oil. The borders didn't match the ones she'd seen in town. Some lines had been scratched out and redrawn. A name had been torn from a corner. The ground beneath this ranch was unsettled, in more ways than one. And yet, for all that, the men stayed, ate, worked, slept in their bunks, like the land was theirs to dream on. She began asking quiet questions, the kind spoken with raised eyebrows and half-smiles. Most of the answers came without words. One of the older men, drunk on cough whiskey one night, said, "That man who walks the line? He was here before it was called Three Lanterns." How long before? Long enough to bury something. She didn't press. Didn't need to. His eyes were too full of ghosts. Then came the stranger. He arrived just before dusk, boots polished, coat too clean for the road. He asked for water. She gave it to him. He asked about the foreman. She pointed him toward the barn. He left with a thank you that felt rehearsed. By morning, he was gone. No one saw him leave. The quiet man found a torn scrap of paper by the front gate. The cook found it later, folded in half near the wash basin. It wasn't addressed, but the words were sharp. Bounty still stands. Ownership unclear. Gather evidence. That night, no one slept easy. Guns were oiled. Horses stayed saddled. The boy didn't come for his biscuit. She dreamed of a land cracking open and swallowing names, deeds, bones. Of a voice saying, "You can't claim what was never yours." When she woke, the horizon was bleeding red, and the wind was different. Something had shifted. The quiet man sat on the porch, hat in his hands. She brought him coffee without asking. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, softly, "They're coming." She didn't ask who. She only asked, "Are we ready?" He looked out at the dry fields, the fence line, the barn that had survived more than fire. "No," he said, "but we've got to be." Rain came like a confession, slow at first, then sudden, unrelenting. It hammered the tin roof of the bunkhouse and turned the yard to a patchwork of mud and hoofprints. Thunder rolled low, a warning in the gut more than the ears. The ranch huddled against it all, every board and beam creaking like old bones caught in a storm they'd lived through before. The cook stood in the doorway of the kitchen, apron damp, hair curling at her temples. She watched the rain blur the edges of the world, watched the cowboys shuffle inside, boots heavy with clay and silence. No one spoke. Not until the quiet man entered last, shoulders soaked, eyes unreadable. He didn't sit, just leaned near the stove, arms crossed, watching her work like each motion told him something. She set a plate on the table without a word. He didn't take it. Lightning cracked across the field, illuminating the barn in white fire. Someone cursed under their breath. The boy hadn't been seen in 2 days. Neither had the stranger, who came asking questions and left before the rooster crowed. She turned from the window and asked the quiet man softly, "You knew him, didn't you?" He didn't answer. But later, after the meal, when the others had gone and the fire burned low, he spoke. His voice was raw stone, unused, cracked from disuse. "He wasn't after you," he said. "He was after me." She didn't blink. "What did you do?" His eyes met hers. Calm. Tired. Lived. She sat down. That's not the kind of answer that quiets people. He let the silence stretch between them until it felt like a bridge too thin to cross. Then he said, "This land belonged to my father. Before the war. Before ink and blood changed hands." She remembered the map, the torn name, the scorch marks. He continued. "They forged deeds, buried titles, hung the lawyer who filed the original claim. My family ran. I came back when the names changed again. To take it back?" He shook his head. "To see if it was still mine, if it remembered me." She thought about that. The way the wind shifted when he walked the line. The way the fence posts stood straighter after his hands passed over them. "You've never said your name." "I buried it with my brother." That was all he offered. And enough. The rain didn't stop. It deepened. The barn's roof groaned under the weight of it. The earth soaked up memory until it turned slick with the past. 2 nights later, the boy returned, silent, soaked, barefoot. In his hands, he carried a rusted tin box. She found him in the pantry, standing still as wood. She knelt and opened the box without asking. Inside, a deed, yellowed and spotted with age. A photograph of a younger man with the same eyes as the quiet one. A wedding ring. A folded piece of parchment torn at the corner, with a seal still pressed faintly into the wax. She didn't know what all of it meant, but she understood the shape of it. Proof. Memory. Blood. And reason enough to get a man killed. He didn't say where he found it. Just looked at her like he wanted her to know it mattered. She hid the box beneath the floorboards in her room and didn't tell anyone, not even the quiet man. Some truths had to wait for the right fire. That fire came the next dusk. The stranger returned. This time, not alone. 6 riders came with him, coats too clean, spurs too polished. Their leader carried a rolled document and a voice that carried like a whip. They came with claims, with signatures, with legal words that meant little to the mud-covered men who had poured sweat into this land. The foreman stood on the porch, glass eye catching the dying sun. He didn't flinch, just listened, then spat into the dirt and said, "You bring a lawyer or a gun?" "Both," the stranger said. The cook stepped forward, apron still dusted with flour. Her hands were steady. "This place feeds 13 men," she said, "and 1 boy who don't speak. It may not look like much, but it's theirs." The stranger smiled, all teeth and arrogance. "It isn't." She almost reached for the box right then. Almost. But something stopped her. The quiet man stood from where he'd been sitting, cleaning a saddle. Walked forward slow. No gun on him. Just the truth in his spine. "This land was stolen," he said. The stranger shrugged. "So was all of it. That's the West." But not all of it's still bleeding. Something shifted then. The men behind the stranger tensed. So did the Cowboys. A shot wasn't fired, but it sat in the air like thunder waiting for breath. The foreman stepped down from the porch. "You got 3 minutes to ride off, or we stop listening." The stranger didn't move, but neither did the quiet man. Not toward a gun, not toward retreat. Then the boy appeared. He walked straight through the gap between both sides, holding something in his hands. The photograph. He looked up at the quiet man, then at the stranger, and said in a voice clear and fragile from disuse, "It's his." That single sentence cracked something. The stranger's face tightened. His men shifted. The paper in his hand no longer seemed enough. The foreman spoke, softer this time. "Sometimes proof don't need ink. Sometimes it just needs a witness." The stranger didn't ride off, but he didn't shoot either. He left the document behind and turned his horse. That night, the cook lit a lantern and sat beside the quiet man as he stared at the stars. The boy slept in the hay. The rain had passed. "Your name," she said. "What is it?" He looked at her for a long while. Then, almost like a prayer, he said it. And the land, for the first time, seemed to breathe it in. By morning, the world had stilled. Not in peace, but in waiting. The sky hung low with gold and smoke, like dawn had been delayed by something older than the sun. The cook stoked the stove in silence, her hands moving out of habit. She hadn't slept, not really. The quiet man had sat by the door all night, rifle across his knees, his name still echoing in her mind. He had spoken it like a secret and a burden. Not a claim to land, but to loss. The others were slow to rise. The boy was already up, mucking the stalls without being asked. The foreman stood at the edge of the fence line, his coat too light for the morning cold, as if daring the wind to freeze him. They all felt it. The line had been drawn, not with chalk or ink, but with breath and blood. Word had spread. Riders had been seen to the west, Danton's men. Not the polished kind. The other kind. Hired iron. By noon, the bunkhouse was empty. Every man posted somewhere, by the barn, the ridge, the gate. Not many had spoken, but each had chosen. Chosen to stay. The cook stood on the porch with a rifle she barely knew how to hold and the tin box beneath her feet. The quiet man joined her, watching the horizon like it might speak first. "You could still go," he said. She shook her head. "So could you." He didn't smile, but something softened in him. "They'll want blood," she said. "I know. And if you give them yours, then maybe the land forgets me. But I don't forget it." The boy appeared beside them, clutching the photograph tighter than a weapon. He hadn't spoken again since that night. He didn't need to. The dust rose on the trail like a storm being summoned. 5 riders. Then 10. Then more. Faces hidden by scarves and hats. Guns at their sides like religion. Danton wasn't among them. He didn't have to be. His orders rode in their holsters. They didn't stop at the gate. Didn't offer papers or names. The foreman met them halfway across the field, a shotgun in his arms and that glass eye glinting. When he spoke, his voice was calm. "You're trespassing." One of them laughed, sharp and cold. "So are you." The quiet man stepped forward, the cook beside him. He didn't raise his weapon, didn't raise his voice. "This land belonged to my father. He carved the posts from trees that don't grow anymore. He died thinking it would carry his name." One of the riders spat. "Names don't matter. Deeds do." The cook kicked the tin box forward into the dirt. It landed with a thud that seemed louder than thunder. "Then read it," she said. No one moved. No one needed to. The moment had arrived. Not a shootout. Not yet. But something more final. A choice. The youngest rider dismounted, picked up the box, opened it. He stared at the contents, then back at the man who'd once been nameless. "What's your proof?" one shouted. The quiet man pointed, not to the paper, but to the boy. "My blood's still here. My memory's still here. That's more than any seal can give you." Then it came. A twitch. A flicker. A mistake. One rider drew. The foreman fired first. The sound shattered the stillness. A scream. A hoarse rearing. Dust exploded. The air filled with gunpowder and instinct. The cook dropped to her knees behind a barrel, heart hammering. She didn't fire. She watched. The boy stood still. Amid the chaos, the quiet man didn't shoot. He moved. Fast, precise, like a man who'd done it before and hoped never to again. He disarmed too. Struck one across the temple with the butt of his rifle. Then he saw the foreman fall. The shot hit him high, near the shoulder. He stumbled backward, blood staining his coat like a slow sunrise. The quiet man caught him before he hit the ground. "I knew," the foreman whispered. "Knew you were his. Saw it in your eyes first day." The quiet man's voice cracked for the first time. "Why didn't you tell them?" "Not my story." A cough, wet and final. "Yours now." He died with his hand on the quiet man's chest, like giving something back. The riders, those who hadn't fled, dropped their weapons. The fight had gone out of them, not from loss of bullets, but loss of reason. They rode off without looking back. The cook stood, shaking. The wind had shifted. The sky cleared. She looked at the quiet man, now cradling the ledger the foreman had once locked in his drawer. He opened it. Page after page of names, numbers, debts, and supplies, and one last entry, scribbled in a different hand. "He walks the line because no one else will. Let him stay." By dusk, the bodies had been buried. The boy helped, silent and precise. The bunkhouse lit its lamps without laughter, but without fear. That night, the cook didn't sleep in her room. She stayed by the fire, the boy curled beside her, the quiet man watching the door. She didn't ask what came next. But in the silence, he said, "I'm not leaving." She nodded. "Neither am I." They hadn't won. Not really. But they hadn't given it away, either. And for now, the land seemed willing to let them stay.